Hi, Nisha. Thanks for joining us today. Um, I
Yeah, I'm
have
excited.
I have 23 questions for you. Answer as fast as you can without thinking, which I know is hard for a writer. Question number one. Do you write in book margins?
I do not.
Like refuse?
Yeah, I think that's sacrilegious.
Oh, I love that. Such a respect for the books. And so interesting coming from a book that is so a chapbook that's very much not respecting a book, and then to love the margins. I think that is a really cool position. Okay, question number two. What was the last great film that you saw?
Honestly, I just did a rewatch of the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, which is one of my top three Pride and Prejudice rewatches. And yeah, I don't think I'll ever get tired of rewatching Pride and Prejudice because I was very sad when they took it off Netflix, and it is back on Netflix now.
Would you believe I've never seen it?
I would believe it, but only because there's so many different versions of Pride and Prejudice. So I'm sure you've seen at least one of the last six.
I haven't. Okay, I
All
will.
good.
You're not the first person who has expressed this love, so I'm on it. It's on my list. I promise. I read it. I at least have that.
Of course, of course.
Um, Nisha, do you sing in the shower? And if so, what songs?
I used to sing in the shower at my mother's house, which is very embarrassing. And I would mostly sing musicals because I was practicing for musical theater until I found out that my sister, who shares that wall, could hear me the entire time. Also, I can't really carry a pitch. Musical theater at my high school was more just a participation award. Like anyone who wanted to was in it, and not everyone was very good.
I also love a musical. Do you have a favorite?
I really like Into the Woods. I know it's very dark and very scary for a lot of people, but it has such a beautiful and complex score.
What a choice. Great choice. Um, Nisha, name a poet who has been a major influence on you.
Oh, 100%. My partner and fiance, Matthew James Wiggle, whose book comes out actually on the 12th of April. So that's next week with Coach House. And I like to think of our relationship as two poets, as one of allyship. We are both graduate students, and our work truly does inform each other's, even though our work is very different and you can't always tell exactly where the influence comes from. But for me, like, not only is he like an emotional support throughout the creative process, he is an intellectual ally. And so he's the first person to see something new or experimental, and he's often the last person to proofread it for me.
I love that. Um, what's your favorite word right now?
Ooh, that's a good one. I've really been using like words around my master's program, which is in disability justice and disability studies. And I've really taken to the word assemblage.
Mm.
And essentially, what it comes down to is like the idea that a disabled body, for instance, is not just an individual person or the individual physical self, but that disabled people rely maybe on other devices or even other people to help them live their lives. And those things all become part of who they are through an assemblage.
Mhm. It's a great word.
Mhm.
Are you a morning person?
I am not. This is actually very early for me, 2 p.m. Yeah.
2 p.m. is early.
Yeah, and I was working in Mountain Standard Time for a while,
Right.
even though my boss was in Eastern Time. So there would be days my boss emailed me you know, at like end of the day, and it's like I wouldn't even be able to respond in time because I was like so I worked so late. I usually stay up till like 3 or 4 a.m. and work through the night.
Oh my gosh. So if you're staying up that late, what is like the last thing that you do before you fall asleep?
Well, for the last 4 months, it's been the Wordle.
Mhm.
I do it right before bed.
You do it before bed?
I do, yeah. Yeah.
I do it first thing in the morning. I don't think either of them are good times for it. I get angry.
Yeah, I've never left Wordle overnight, even if it frustrates me. And I think the longest I've taken was like 20 minutes where I really suffered. But usually it takes like a couple minutes and then I can just go to bed.
Oh my gosh, we're so the opposite. Sometimes I like just shut it down because I'm angry and I'll keep coming back to it over like several hours.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
plagues me. It plagues me. Okay, so then what time of the day do you get most of your writing done?
I think the evenings are the best for that, usually beyond 9 p.m. to kind of like 2 a.m. Which isn't like the biggest window, but that is when some of my most innovative or experimental work really kind of comes out. I really need a lot of stimulation that isn't poetry or writing in order to get the next big idea. And so I spend the day usually attending to my job or doing like other work. And then at night, I really get to act on how I've processed all of that information.
Uh, do you read a lot outside of grad school, or does that take up all your reading mind?
Honestly, grad school has been the the focus of all my reading in the last year. I used to read a lot more YA, so young adult fiction, and I'm working on my fiction novel right now and trying to finish that actually by next week.
Wow.
But generally, I read poetry, I read YA, and lately I've been able to read for pleasure again, which is like reading fan fiction.
Fan fiction, like what? What are you reading right now?
Oh, yeah, all over the place. Usually like musical groups or like TV shows and like anime, like all sorts of things.
Um, do you consider yourself to be a routine person?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I like absolutely hate routine.
You hate it.
I
Why?
do. I just think that, trying to adhere to doing like the same sorts of things every day is so boring. And even as someone who is like sick and has to take medications every day, I have found it like a really big struggle and a really big marker of like how strong I've had to become that I don't forget to do those things every single day. And I think like because I have to do them to stay alive, I really don't want routine in any other part of my life.
Oh yeah. That makes sense to me. Um, do you remember the very first thing you ever wrote?
Yeah, I think in grade school. So I couldn't read for a long time. I was like kind of behind, but I was clever. So I would like memorize what words sounded like as a whole, like the whole shape of a word. And I learned to read that way. And I think the first thing I wrote creatively were these like descriptive poems, one sentence poems in like first grade. And I think it's really funny because now I write like these run on sentence poems, basically as like the primary poem that I write, which is like exactly the same as what I wrote then. But I did actually stop creative writing for a very long time and went to do other things and pursue different degrees and stuff like that. So becoming a writer again was a return to those creative impulses.
Yeah, it's so interesting to compare this idea of the descriptive sentence poem with your work
Mm-hmm.
now. I think
Yeah.
I like tracing that line.
Mm-hmm.
Name one book that you think everyone should read.
Yeah, this is going to be unsurprising to anyone, but I think my partner's book, White Mud Walking, is just magical and phenomenal. The book is his way of working through his ancestry and connection to Treaty 6. One of his ancestors signed actually Treaty 6, and many of his ancestors have signed the other numbered treaties in Canada. And as he goes through archival materials in the same way that my chapbook goes through archival materials, he really explores what it means to be dispossessed of your own heritage and be the subject of colonial violence. I think his is a book that, you know, is very difficult for a lot of people to read, and it's extraordinary because although there is a lot of grief and sadness in it, I also find that there is like a lot of hope and bravery in undertaking work that at the graduate level, like proves your own oppression, right? Like to be a Indigenous graduate student and have to study the ways your direct ancestors were harmed by colonialism, I think is like a very valuable and important thing for him to go through. And like I said, that book comes out next week, and I'm just so excited for him and excited for where it's going to take him.
Yeah, it sounds excellent. I'm really excited for it. I loved the chapbook. It was Treaty, It Was Me is just what a chapbook.
Yeah.
So that also
sure.
I'm really leaving off this like mutual support, mutual influence thing that's happening. It's delightful. Okay, let's talk about Not a Disorder. So first of all, I'm so interested in this merger of the visuals that are core to the way that this chapbook makes its meaning, and then the text itself. So I want to ask you, first of all, are you thinking about the visuals, how the poetry is going to look on the page when you're writing all the time? Is that a special thing that happens with certain works? Like, what's your relationship to the look of the text on the page?
Yeah, so for a lot of that chapbook, the work is based on actual set layout and set typeface and stuff like that. And so on those pages, you know, I have done the style of poem or commentary that looks like an annotation, or that is a play on that set form and that set visual. In other places in the chapbook, I have designed and done the poem basically straightforward, the same way that a poet doing any other work will space and have line breaks and stuff like that. And for me, like as someone who is working in a lot of visual mediums now for the first time, and also like used to do a lot more visual art, there's something really beautiful about treating the entire poem as part of the page, which is something I learned from Jordan Abel, the Griffin winner. And he taught me that essentially the entire page becomes a unit, not just the word of the poem. And so every page in Not a Disorder is a visual statement for me, even the pages that are just a poem, straightforward, you know, words and alignment and stuff like that. So it becomes like a very visual process, a very engaged process. Some poems that are visual come to me the same as words do. Other poems are deliberate, they're more crafted, they come after study and reflection. And really, I think that reflects any creative process. You know, if you're framing a shot in, you know, visual art or photography, there is as much of an act of taking away from what is outside the frame as well as adding to what is in the frame.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, are you thinking about these visuals in the same way now that you say you're working on fiction? Are you thinking about the visuals at all there?
Yeah, you know, I am not a great fiction writer, 100%. I actually I've been trying to write this book since last June, and it is not going well because I think like for me, the idea that you can just make up a world is terrifying. Like I have so much respect for fiction writers, because everything I do is based in memoir and my personal experience. And so creating something out of nothing is basically impossible, in my opinion, to the extent that fiction requires it. And so the only way I've been able to ground visually where my book is taking place and what's happening is to rely on the things I know. So the places I know, the settings I know, and then altering them in a way that doesn't get me like legally in trouble, right? So like people I know share traits across the board. They have different jobs. I've asked permission from some of my friends to be able to write characters like them. Some have refused and I've taken it out. Some have agreed and are like super excited. And so like I would say I'm not a good person to advise on how to write fiction. Maybe like one day I will be after I go back to grad school for the second time this fall. But at this time, like I think it's very different from what I do in poetry, and it has been extremely challenging.
Wow, that's so refreshing to hear. I love that honesty.
Yeah.
Okay, so then time for some like brutal honesty, I guess, from me. Okay. Your work in general, and especially in this chapbook, is obviously doing this cool erasure, archival, dealing with source text work, and you're doing the visual work, and you're doing this great linguistic play. But I really feel like your like moment to shine is reading and performing. Like that's where it is straight up over for the rest of us. You take a stage like, ugh. So do you think, I mean, I think it's probably a stupid question. I'm sure the answer is yes, but are you thinking about how a poem is going to read? Like how you're going to read it aloud when you're writing?
Yeah. So like my background is in performance poetry. It's in slam and spoken word. And when I set out to write not just this chapbook, but the larger body the chapbook comes from, I thought that I was writing in silence. I thought this was like a visual manuscript. I didn't really think about the verbal element, but it's kind of like you can't change who you are. Your muscle memory remains. And in reading some of these poems out loud, which I've now done like a few times over the last year of working on this book, the last 2 years of working on this book, these poems have come to life because of that muscle memory. Like I can't not read them the way I read them, and I can't not perform them the way that I perform them. To me, internally, there's a huge difference. Like I didn't write these poems with the intention to be read out loud, but of course, like they are written in my voice. Like voice is something that all writers strive to achieve. And because they are my voice, they inevitably sound like me even when written aloud.
Hearing you read sometimes changes how, like it certainly kind of changed how I read the chapbook too, hearing you read from it. So it definitely adds this whole element that, I mean, you just, you're so good.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
What was the best thing about writing this book?
I think I would say the best and the hardest thing was taking my very storied medical history, in which I felt like a victim, or I felt like I had been looked down on, or I felt like I had been held back, and taking that and turning it into something that has become for me an object from which I can form connections with other people. And I think, you know, the very insular process of being a medical patient or being a medical client, as the book talks about, is one that is inherently lonely. And they want you to feel isolated, right? Even if you have friends or a support network, they're not, you know, in the room with you when you're getting that treatment or when you're in the doctor's office. And so being able to take those experiences, most of which were very scary for me, very stressful, very depressed, and turning them into something that other people can talk about is just, it's such a gift and it's such a pleasure. And so I think the best part is now that the book is out, I can have those conversations with people who maybe have never had them before and maybe are not poets themselves. And for the people who are writing in this genre, of disability poetics. I feel like I'm part of the conversation, that I've joined the conversation, and that we can speak as peers through our journeys.
It feels just empowering, even just hearing you talk about it. So you said that this is part of a larger project.
Mhm.
What motivated you to pull this part out and publish it as a chapbook?
Yes, that's a great question. So this chapbook initially was submitted to the Vellum Chapbook Award. It was a finalist, but it wasn't selected, and I'm so happy because I'm like so excited to be with you guys at Gap Riot. But what motivated me was just that I was doing this work, and it was like very interior. It was like in my head during the bulk of the pandemic, where no one was really interacting with others and people were staying indoors. And it just became this thing that was stuck inside of me. And so as soon as the opportunity came up where I was like, you know what, like I don't have to sit on a manuscript that is now like almost 200 pages long. I'm like, I don't need to sit in my own loneliness around it. So I pulled like one element of that story, which is working through the DSM-5. And that book weaves in many different elements. It has parts about physical illness, it has parts about concussion, it has parts about, you know, anxiety and depression. And this particular cross section, I think, is representative of the whole project. And so I took these poems out to really introduce folks to this new direction that my work is taking, and serve as a marker in time of what I was doing at this age. And hopefully, like, you know, 10 years from now, I can look back and be like, okay, like this was the start of this type of work in that period of my life. I've always treated my chapbooks as markers in time, not as, you know, objects that are going to last forever. And I think like that relationship to my work is one that has been really, really healthy for me to approach.
I love this idea of a chapbook as a marker in time. That's fabulous. Okay, this question is really more for me than for anybody else, but I'm just wondering, after working on this project, do you feel like you like the Incredible Hulk more or less?
Yeah, yeah, because that poem, you know, if the Incredible Hulk was disabled, uh, is in that chapbook. That was actually probably one of my first lines of inquiry into disability and pop culture. And so like the textbook medicalization kind of bent that I was on was getting increasingly narrow. Like it felt like the walls were closing in. And then I felt like I had a breakthrough when I like came up with this idea of disabled superheroes. And not one that I like created myself, but one where I was like, oh, like this is a line of inquiry now. And it actually came about because like my partner Matthew was rewatching all the Marvel movies, which again, like film snobs are like, these are not good movies. And then like Marvel superhero bros are like, these are amazing movies. And for me and Matthew, we were like, these movies pass the time. We like explosions, like we like, you know, rousing speeches, we like sacrifice, and like let's just watch all of these again for like the third time during the pandemic.
For sure.
And my desk is like right next to the TV. And I was sitting there like doing this disability work. And then I was like, oh my God, like technically, like I'm like, the Hulk is disabled. Maybe in a like a visible way that the others are not disabled. And that was just like that was it. Like that was like a whole thing. And it's gonna continue to be a thing, I think, for me to like see disability in popular culture.
Yeah, it's fabulous the way the poem reorients the character. That is
Mhm.
such a cemented popular culture character, and to have to
Yeah.
look at the whole transformation aspect in a completely different way is it's so fun.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
for
really enjoy the Incredible Hulk as a character, and
sure.
I feel a kind of affinity with him sometimes.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
what
for
that says
sure.
about me. Okay. I lost count somewhere in there because questions got sub questions and follow-up questions, but I think I'm right that we are at question number 23, which is the
Okay.
hardest of all the questions. Get ready. If you could describe this chapbook in 3 words and only 3 words, what would they be?
That's great. I'm gonna go with not my life. Yeah.
Ugh, right in the feels. Why do you have like just a direct link to my guts? Ugh. Love it. Love that way of answering the question. I had such a nice time chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for trusting us with this chapbook.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I hope that it stays in like good company and that it becomes like, you know, one of the favorites. Yeah.
Well, I think it's well on its way there.